The hiss of stale coffee striking a hot plate filled the Aurora diner like a weary metronome, keeping time with lives that never seemed to change. Maya Rivera wiped down the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach, her movements automatic from endless repetition. The Tuesday night shift was always the same chorus of truckers with mud on their boots, travelers too tired to smile, and locals with nowhere else to be. The rain outside streaked the expansive front windows in crooked silver lines, and every few seconds the neon sign flickered like a heartbeat about to fail. Apaya, the diner, was both a sanctuary and a prison. She had grown up sketching with colored pencils, dreaming of design studios and portfolios showing the world she could create beauty out of blankness. Those dreams now sat in a dusty box under her bed. What she carried with her every night was the responsibility of her younger brother, Luca. His medications were expensive, his hospital visits endless, and the fragile hope of his survival rested on the weight of her aching feet and the crumpled bills she pocketed in tips. She balanced a chipped mug in her hand, pouring black liquid into it as if she were pouring out pieces of her youth. When a coworker failed to show, 8-hour shifts became 10, sometimes 12. The ache in her arches was constant, a dull pulse that reminded her she was alive, even as she felt herself fading. Her apron was always damp somewhere, from coffee or from rain dragged in on someone's coat, and she had stopped trying to wash out the smell of onions from her hair. Mr. Halpern, her manager, barked orders from the corner like a conductor without rhythm.
Rivera, table 3 needs their check. Rivera, refill those sodas. Rivera, you look like you're at a funeral.
She would bite the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, smile as instructed, and move with the mechanical grace of someone who knew the cost of failure. Losing this job meant losing Luca's treatment. Losing Luca was unthinkable. Imprisoned, the diner was unusually crowded. A family of 4 argued over pancakes, the children restless and loud. An older woman folded her napkin into perfect triangles, her loneliness bare in each precise crease. A young couple whispered angrily at the back booth, their words sharp even in hushed tones. Maya noticed it all because she had trained to see more than orders and empty plates. Seeing was part of surviving. It kept her alert, reminded her that every person carried a story. In the far corner, beneath the buzzing light that flickered now and again, sat a man unlike the rest. He wore a plain gray Henley and jeans, clothes that looked simple but cut from finer fabric than the polyester around him. For nearly 2 hours, he nursed a single cup of coffee, unmoved by the chatter, untouched by the rain outside. He didn't scroll through a phone or bury himself in a newspaper. He watched. His gaze was steady, not cruel, not leering, but analytical, as though he were collecting details invisible to others. His eyes were dark, absorbing rather than reflecting, and the stillness of his presence made him seem out of place in the greasy clatter of the diner. Maya tried not to look back at him too often, but she felt his quiet observation like a current in the air. She had been watched before, judged by managers and mocked by customers, but this was different. This was patient, reserved, almost deliberate. She briefly wondered who had sat alone for hours to sip burnt coffee, then pushed the thought aside and focused on refilling sodas. The rain hammered harder against the windows, each gust of wind rattling the thin glass panes. The neon sign buzzed, faltered, then steadied. Maya moved among the tables with her pot of coffee, smiling at the children, nodding politely to the older woman, wiping up a spill without being asked. Her body obeyed a choreography she no longer needed to think about, each step a practice motion that kept chaos in check. Yet beneath the mask of efficiency, she carried the image of her brother's face when he slept, his breath shallow, his hair damp from fever. That image drove her on, made her accept long nights and sour managers, and endured sneers from those who thought a waitress was beneath notice. Luca deserved more than life had given him, and the only way to provide it was to survive each day at the Aurora diner. Outside, a truck horn blared, echoing across the wet pavement. Inside, the plates clattered, forks scraped, and voices rose and fell in tired patterns. Maya stood at the counter, briefly resting the coffee pot, her eyes drifting again to the man in the corner. His stillness was a kind of storm. And though she didn't yet know it, the quiet weight of his gaze would soon unravel the fragile threads of her world. Tonight, the hiss of the hot plate was not only the rhythm of survival, but the opening note of a song she had never imagined she would hear. The bell above the door clanged with unnecessary violence, and the diner seemed to shudder at the intrusion. A gust of wind swept through the room, scattering napkins and carrying with it the sharp scent of cologne that was too heavy, too arrogant. Brent Dalton strode in like he owned the cracked linoleum beneath his polished shoes. His suit was expensive in fabric, but tasteless in design, with loud pinstripes and a sheen that caught the dim light of the diner in all the wrong ways. His phone was already in his hand, thumbs dancing over the screen with impatient taps. Maya felt her stomach tighten, as it always did when men like him appeared. She had seen the type too many times. The entitlement clung to him like armor, the certainty that every request was a command. She braced herself, pasted on the thin smile that never reached her eyes, and approached as he dropped into a booth with a theatrical sigh. "Sweetheart," he said, without looking up, "steak medium rare, beer, make it quick." Maya balanced her order pad in her palm. "What kind of beer would you like, sir?" "Whatever's domestic and cold. Please don't make me think." Killing, her jaw tightened, but she nodded, scribbling quickly. Behind the counter, Mr. Halpern's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Rivera, hurry it up. Table 5 is waiting." She moved with purpose, placing the order in the kitchen, pouring the beer, and delivering it with silent efficiency. Dalton barely glanced at her, his eyes glued to his glowing screen. The hiss and clang of the grill filled the next 20 minutes, the kitchen staff moving with the speed of weary professionals. Finally, the steak was plated and slid beneath the heat lamp. Maya lifted it carefully and carried it to Dalton's table. "Here you are, sir. Steak medium rare." He cut into it immediately, shoved a piece into his mouth, chewed once, and then the sound of his fork clattering against the plate silenced half the diner. "What is this garbage?" He boomed, his voice loud enough to shake the windows. "I said medium rare. This is shoe leather. Are you deaf or just incompetent?" Maya froze. Every eye turned toward her. The knot in her stomach twisted into something sharper. Mr. Halpern's head jerked up from his office, his expression thunderous. "I am very sorry, sir," Maya said, forcing steadiness into her tone despite the tremor in her hands. "I will have the kitchen prepare another one right away." "Don't bother," Dalton sneered, shoving the plate aside with disdain. "I have lost my appetite. I am not paying for this slop." Her breath caught. "Sir, you have eaten a quarter of it." "Are you arguing with me?" His voice rose higher still, sharp and cutting. "You want me to tell your manager what a useless waitress you are? I am not paying. Get me the check for the beer." Waged Mr. Halpern was already scurrying over, his face twisted into a mask of apology. "Sir, my apologies. Of course, the steak is on the house. Is there anything else we can do for you?" Shot a venomous glare at Maya, a look that stripped her dignity as effectively as his words. "I will speak with you later," Bennett Halpern snapped, using her last name like a curse. Immense sweat flushed up Maya's neck. Her vision blurred with the sting of unshed tears, but she bit them back hard. She would not cry here, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. She busied herself wiping down a counter, her back to the room, her movements rigid. The laughter of a group of travelers stung her ears. Somewhere, a child clinked a spoon against a glass. The world kept moving, indifferent to the way humiliation burned her from the inside out. When Dalton finally slapped a few bills on the table to cover his beer and stormed out, the room exhaled in relief. Maya approached the booth with mechanical steps, gathering the plate and utensils. As she lifted the plate, she froze. Tucked beneath it was a $20 bill. Her brow furrowed. Dalton had left the diner sneering. He would never tip. She turned the bill over in her fingers, crisp, folded, deliberate, enough to cover the steak he had refused to pay for. She walked it straight to Mr. Halpern. "Sir, the man at table 7 left this. It covers the steak." Halpern snatched it from her hand without a glance. Good. Means I don't have to dock it from your pay. He stuffed it into the register with a grunt, already dismissing her. Undecided hard. The 20 had been a small spark of decency, perhaps accidental, perhaps not, but it had been swallowed by the register and by Halpern's indifference. She turned back to the floor, shoulders squared against the weight pressing down her chest. The night stretched, the rain still hammering against the glass, the neon light flickering above. Maya carried plates, poured coffee, and smiled through the burn of shame. Somewhere in the corner, the quiet man still sat with his untouched coffee, watching, not with cruelty, but with a patience that unsettled her more than Dalton's rage ever could. His gaze remained calm and steady, as though he had seen everything and was waiting for her to look back finally. Fiending to a steady whisper against the diner's expansive glass windows, and the crowd that had once filled every booth and stool began to thin. Maya moved through the aisles with her coffee pot, shoulders still tight from the encounter with Brent Dalton. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if humiliation clung to her apron. The sound of forks clinking against plates had quieted, replaced by the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. She focused on the rhythm of work to keep herself from spiraling. Wipe a table, refill a glass, smile at a child, and gather tips barely covering the bus fare home. Her body functioned like a machine, but her thoughts ran wild beneath the surface. She wondered how long she could keep this up, how many more years her back could bend, and her smile could stretch before she broke entirely. The quiet man in the corner had not moved. His cup of coffee was no more than a dark ring at the bottom, untouched for over an hour. Yet his presence filled the booth like a shadow that refused to leave. His steady and deliberate gaze followed every moment, though never in a way that made her skin crawl. Instead, it was as if he were weighing invisible scales, recording every detail of her composure. When the last rowdy family gathered their coats and pushed through the door, Maya approached his table out of obligation. She balanced the half-empty pot in her hand. "More coffee, sir?" He looked up, and his eyes met hers for the first time. They were a shade of green so intense it startled her, like moss after a storm. "No, thank you," he said, his voice deep and calm, carrying none of the sharpness she had endured earlier. "Just the check, please." Klang scribbled quickly, placing the slip on the small tray and setting it before him. The bill amounted to little more than $2.50. He reached into his pocket and produced a sleek black credit card, heavy and metallic in her hand when she carried it to the register. The name embossed on it caught her attention for the briefest moment. Adrian Vale. The name meant nothing to her yet, but it struck her as the kind of name that belonged to someone important. Someone who did not belong in a place like the Aurora Diner. Nishi ran the card, printed the receipt, and returned it with polite efficiency. He signed without flourish, then folded the slip neatly before setting it back on the tray. "Have a good night," he said, his eyes lingering on her just long enough to suggest something unspoken. "You too, sir," she replied automatically, her exhaustion making her voice sound hollow. He rose to his full height, taller than she expected, with the kind of presence that made the air shift subtly. He gave a slight nod and walked out into the wet night, the bell above the door chiming softly behind him. The room felt strangely emptier than when the crowd had left, as if his absence removed an anchor she had not realized was holding the place steady. Maya picked up the tray, expecting little more than a modest tip, if anything at all. A 20% gratuity on a $2 bill would barely buy a bus ticket. She unfolded the receipt, her breath catching in her throat. The number 5,000 was written on the tip line. Not $5, not $50, 5,000. Her hands trembled as she stared, convinced fatigue was twisting her vision. She blinked hard, but the number remained. Beneath it, in firm, clean handwriting, was a short message. Character is a currency that isn't accepted everywhere. Where it matters, it is priceless. Your patience tonight was worth more than this. And below the message is a phone number. A final line read, If you believe you are worth more than this diner, call me. We have something to discuss." Maya collapsed into the booth, clutching the slip of paper as though it might vanish. The diner was quiet, only the steady drip of rain and the faint hum of the neon sign filling the silence. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure Mr. Halpern would hear it in his office. She folded the paper and slipped it quickly into her apron pocket, her mind spinning with disbelief. $5,000 could cover 2 months of rent. It could pay for a complete cycle of Luca's medication. But it was not the money that unsettled her most. The note, the recognition written in precise lines, the sense that someone had truly seen her. She had read it 100 times through the night, turning the words over until they blurred. $5,000, a phone number, a challenge written in a stranger's hand. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she kept lifting the cup to her lips out of habit, her body trying to maintain some rhythm of normalcy while her mind spun in circles. Across the room, Luca lay on the sofa beneath a blanket, his breathing shallow but steady. The morning light showed the pale hue of his skin, the exhaustion etched into his young features. His latest medication vial sat on the end table, a small glass container worth more than anything else in the apartment. Maya stared at it, then at the receipt, their connection unmistakable. One cycle of medicine, one impossible tip. Piping. It had to be a mistake. She told herself that again and again. No one left $5,000 for a cup of coffee. It was either a scam or a cruel joke. The number was probably a line that charged by the minute, draining every cent she had. Maybe the man had written the wrong figure, an accidental flourish of zeros, and yet the words were too deliberate, the handwriting steady and strong. Character is currency, the phrase replayed in her mind with the cadence of truth. She folded the slip and tucked it into her pocket before leaving for another shift. The diner was waiting, the smell of grease and onions unchanged. Mr. Halpern barked orders with his usual scowl. Customers came and went, and Maya moved through it all with her practiced grace. But her thoughts never left the paper in her pocket. Whenever she poured coffee, she wondered if she was meant to remain here forever, her worth measured in tips and refills, or if that note was the door she had never dared to open. Theatrical day, she returned home exhausted, only to find Luca awake, sketching with a dull pencil on a scrap of paper. He looked up when she entered, eyes sharp despite the weariness in his body. "You look worse than usual," he said with a wry smile. "What happened?" Hesitated, then pulled out the folded receipt and placed it on the table. Luca set down his pencil and leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he read. His lips moved silently through the lines, then froze on the number at the bottom. "Is this real?" she whispered. The money cleared into the diner's account. Leaned back, his thin frame trembling with the effort. "Then call it," he said. "I can't." Maya shook her head. "It could be anything, a trick, a trap." Luca's voice sharpened with an intensity that belied his frailty. "You work yourself to the bone every day for me. You give everything. And still, it is never enough. This may be the first time the world is giving something back. Are you really going to ignore it?" Maya clenched her fists against the table. Fear coiled in her stomach. She had been disappointed too many times to believe in miracles. But Luca's eyes were steady, filled with the stubborn hope she had lost long ago. His words cut through her hesitation. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, the phone glowing in her hand. The number stared back at her. She thought of Brent Dalton's sneer, Halpern's grumbling, the endless ache in her feet, and the empty hours of survival. She thought of Luca's quiet breathing in the next room, of his life measured in pills and vials. Her thumb hovered over the dial button. For a long moment she listened to the refrigerator's hum, the distant traffic outside, and the beating of her heart. The phone felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of every choice she had ever made. Pressed the button. The line rang once, twice. Her breath caught. A woman's voice answered, crisp and efficient. "Vale Industries. How may I direct your call? Maya's throat went, "Hello, my name is Maya Rivera. Mr. Adrian Vale gave me this number." There was silence on the other end, followed by the soft click of a keyboard. "One moment, Miss Rivera." Maya gripped the phone tighter, her pulse racing. A swell of classical piano filled the line, refined and distant, so unlike the clatter of the diner. She sat frozen, the music playing against her nerves, until the voice returned. "Mr. Vale can see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. The address is Vale Tower, Penthouse Suite. A car will be waiting at your address at 9:15. But no sound opened. She forced herself to whisper, "Yes." "Exhausting. We will see you then." The line went dead. Read the phone to her lap, staring at the wall in disbelief. The receipt lay on the nightstand beside her, silent but burning with possibility. The cage she had known all her life was still around her, but she could see a key glinting in the lock for the first time. Neil, the morning broke, pale and gray, the light that made the city look washed out and uncertain. Maya stood before her closet with a knot in her stomach, pulling out one item of clothing after another. Every blouse seemed too thin, every pair of pants too worn, every stitch screaming of the life she wanted to escape. She finally settled on black trousers that still held their shape, a plain white blouse that at least looked clean, and a gray cardigan to hide the fraying cuffs. She tied her hair back into a low ponytail, studied her reflection in the cracked mirror, and told herself she could pass for professional if no one looked too closely. At precisely 9:15, a car horn echoed faintly from the street below. Maya peered out the window of her apartment building and nearly stepped back in shock. A black sedan waited by the curb, sleek and polished as if it repelled the grime of the neighborhood. A driver in a crisp suit stepped out, scanning the building until his eyes found her at the window. She felt her heart leap into her throat. This was not a prank, it was happening. The driver opened the back door with a practiced motion as she descended the steps, her shoes squeaking against the concrete. "Miss Rivera?" he asked, his tone calm and professional. "Yes," she whispered, sliding onto the leather seat. The interior smelled of something subtle and expensive, a fragrance that spoke of wealth without ostentation. The car pulled away smoothly, the potholes and rough edges of the streets muted by careful suspension. Maya pressed her palms together in her lap, staring out the window as her neighborhood blurred into the city's sprawl. The closer they came to downtown, the more imposing the skyline grew. And then it appeared. Vale Tower rose into the sky like a blade of obsidian, its black glass exterior reflecting the clouds that drifted across it. The building seemed almost alive, towering above its neighbors with quiet dominance. Maya had seen it from a distance countless times, always untouchable, a monument to another world. Now she was being delivered to its base. The car did not stop at the main entrance, with its revolving doors and crowded plaza. Instead, it descended into a private underground garage lit by cold white lights. The driver led her to a sleek elevator tucked behind a steel gate. He swiped the panel with a keycard, and the doors slid open with a whisper. Maya stepped inside and felt the air shift as the driver remained behind. The elevator had no buttons. No numbers glowed on its polished panel. It was a direct line, a command that brooked no choice. As the doors closed, her ears popped from the sudden acceleration. The sensation was like being launched upward into a new reality. Her stomach twisted as the floor vibrated beneath her shoes, and she gripped the rail along the wall, steadying herself against the pull of gravity and fear. When the doors finally opened, she expected a lobby, perhaps a reception desk or security checkpoint. Instead, she stepped directly into a vast expanse of glass and light. The penthouse stretched out around her in calm silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire city below, sprawling and insignificant from this height. It was as if she had entered a world above the world, a place untethered from noise and struggle. What is new here was sparse, arranged with deliberate precision. Low sofas of dark leather, a single abstract sculpture carved in marble, and shelves of books aligned perfectly along one wall. The air was cool, and the faint hum of hidden vents was still the only sound. For a moment, Maya stood frozen, her modest cardigan and scuffed shoes making her feel like a trespasser in a temple of power. Newham approached, tall and angular, her hair cut in a severe line at her jaw. She wore a suit that fit so flawlessly it seemed part of her. "Miss Rivera," she said, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "I am Victoria Crane, Chief Operating Officer. Mr. Vale will join you shortly. Can I offer you water or coffee?" "Water, please," Maya managed, her voice small. Victoria nodded curtly and turned away, her heels silent against the polished floor. Maya remained standing in the center of the vast room, afraid to touch anything or even breathe too loudly. She moved closer to the window and glanced down. Far below, the Aurora Diner was no more than a smudge along the highway, its buzzing neon sign invisible from this height. From here, all the small struggles of her life looked meaningless, swallowed by the city's immensity. "It is a bit much," a voice said gently. Maya turned sharply. Adrian Vale had entered the room from a doorway she had not noticed. He was dressed in a dark gray suit that fit him like armor, yet his presence was calm, almost understated. His eyes, the same deep green she remembered from the diner, held that same intensity, quiet but unyielding. He said, "Views like this are dangerous," stepping toward her. "They put too much distance between you and the world." Maya nodded faintly, words caught in her throat. She could not tell if he meant the city outside or the fragile space between them. The tower's height pressed against her chest, the glass under her feet reminding her how far she could fall. Yet in that moment, she felt that the elevator had carried her above the city and into the unknown sky of her own future. Adrian Vale gestured toward one of the low leather sofas, and Maya sat carefully, perching on the edge as if any wrong movement might shatter the fragile glass walls around them. He took the chair opposite her, not behind a desk or barrier, but close enough that she felt the weight of his gaze. For a long moment, he said nothing, only studied her with the same calm intensity that had unsettled her at the diner. "Thank you for coming," he said in the end. "I imagine you have many questions." Maya gripped her hands together in her lap. "Just one," she admitted. "The tip. I don't understand." "It was not a tip," he replied. "It was a down payment." Her breath caught. "Down payment for what?" "Mind. For you. For your future." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "I spent 2 hours in that diner on purpose. Once a year. I go there on the anniversary of my parents' first date. It is a ritual, a reminder of where I came from. Most of the time it is a depressing exercise. I watch people treat the staff like they are invisible. I watch managers push their workers to exhaustion. It becomes an ecosystem of casual cruelty." His eyes locked with hers. "But I did not see that in you." Maya felt heat rise in her face. She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "I watched a man demean you over a steak. I watched your manager abandon you. And you did not break. You kept your dignity. You did not return ugliness with ugliness. That is rare. That is a strength." Positioned, she had not felt strong. She had felt humiliated and powerless, yet his words carried the certainty of a verdict, as though he had weighed her actions on scales only he could see. "Immunized in investments," Adrian continued. "I invest in businesses, in technology, in ideas. But most importantly, I invest in people. People with integrity. People who understand what it means to endure." He reached into a folder on the table between them and slid a sheet of paper across to her. Her name was printed at the top. Her heart lurched as her eyes skimmed the words. Medical bills, treatment plans, payment histories. It was her life laid bare in neat rows of numbers. "Your brother, Luca," Adrian said, his voice calm, not cruel. "His treatment is expensive. The protocols are experimental and challenging to maintain. You have sacrificed everything to keep him alive. That is extraordinary." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know all this?" "Come straight? Blackmail. Like I consider an investment, I perform due diligence." "Come street?" Her pulse pounded. "So what are you saying?" "Come street? As of this morning," Adrian said evenly, "your brother's medical debt is gone. I have established a fund to cover every expense he may need moving forward. Consider it a signing bonus." "Come street? I established a fund. To gone." To her mouth, the air tilted around her. The weight of years of fear and debt suddenly lifted. She could barely form words. All of it, she whispered. Come Street? All of it, he confirmed. But that is not the offer. That clears the board. Come Street? She stared at him, her vision blurring with tears she had sworn she would not cry. If this were a dream, she did not want to wake. Come Street? Adrian leaned back, his hands clasped. Come Street? Come Street, I am starting a new branch of my company, the Veil Foundation. It will not be charity in the traditional sense. It will not be writing checks for good press. It will build real systems for families who fall through the cracks of society. Families like yours. I need someone who understands what that feels like. Someone who can see the gaps others ignore. Maya shook her head slowly. I have no experience. I am just a waitress. You are more than that, he said firmly. You studied design. You had talent. You gave it up to take care of your brother. That is not a weakness. That is proof of vision. The foundation will need a face. It will require an identity, logos, campaigns, a voice that speaks to the people it serves. Please, build that. Oined. Her mind whirled. Director of Community Outreach and Brand Development. The title sat heavily and unbelievably in her ears. A salary beyond anything she had dreamed of, an office in this tower, only a few floors below his own. Why me? She whispered through the tears that now spilled freely. You could hire anyone, Adrian said quietly, because the best people to solve a problem are the ones who have lived it. I can hire 100 polished graduates. They can give me spreadsheets. They cannot tell me what it means to choose between medicine and electricity. You can. Your perspective is not a liability, Maya. It is your greatest asset. Clang from the corner of her eye, she caught movement. Victoria Crane stood in the doorway, arms folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes sharp with disapproval. Maya suddenly understood. This was not simply an offer. It was a test. Accepting meant stepping into a world where people like Victoria would circle her, waiting for her to falter. Adrian's voice cut through the silence. The question is simple. Are you ready to use what you have been given? Maya's lips trembled. The word rose before she could stop it. Yes. It was the most terrifying and liberating word she had ever spoken. The first week inside Veil Tower felt like stepping onto another planet. Maya had been given an office on the 48th floor with a window view that stretched across the city like an endless map. The desk gleamed with polished wood. The computer was the kind she had only seen in glossy ads, and the shelves waited empty for books she did not yet own. Every morning, she walked through glass corridors where heels clicked like metronomes, and voices spoke in a language she did not fully understand. Acronyms, margins, projections. It was a dialect of power and money, one she struggled to follow. Her assistant Noah, a quiet young man with nervous energy, tried to help her find her way. He handed her schedules, explained which forms needed signatures, and whispered warnings about meetings. At first, he seemed terrified of her, as though proximity to Adrian Vale's newest appointee might be dangerous. But as days passed, his anxiety softened into something closer to loyalty. He noticed when her hands shook before a presentation, slipped her files that had been withheld, and quietly corrected details others left for her to stumble over. Victoria Crane was another matter entirely. When Maya stepped into the tower, Victoria made her disdain known. She never raised her voice or spoke directly of her contempt, but the message was delivered through countless subtle cuts. Important emails arrived in every inbox except Maya's. Meetings were scheduled, but the invitations somehow went to an old defunct address. When projects were introduced in group settings, Victoria's tone carried an almost imperceptible emphasis as she said, "This is Maya Rivera, who has been placed in charge of our new foundation." The words dripped with suggestion. A pet project, a charity case, not a colleague. Maya had to bury herself in the work. She spent long nights sketching logo concepts, building mock websites, and filling her office walls with color palettes and typography choices. For the first time in years, she felt the thrill of creation, the spark of shaping something from nothing. The foundation was her chance to design a brand and a lifeline. She imagined families like hers, standing at the edge of collapse, given just enough time and help to find stability again. Her vision began to form on paper and screen, bold and full of possibility. Yet, as she rode the elevator, she felt the eyes of hawks upon her. The tower was filled with them, circling silently, their feathers gleaming, their talons hidden until needed. They smiled in passing and shook her hand at introductions, but their glances lingered just long enough to remind her she was not one of them. She was prey among predators, tolerated only because Adrian Vale had declared her valuable. Without his protection, she would be torn apart. One evening after the office had emptied, Maya stared out her window at the city below. The diner lights blinked faintly on the horizon, so small it looked like a firefly caught in the concrete sprawl. She thought of how far she had come and still had to go. Her phone buzzed on the desk, a message from Noah. "Be careful, some of the board members do not want you here." He had sent no context, no details, just the warning. She set the phone down and pressed her palms against the cool glass of the window. The city stretched endlessly, but so did the distance she felt from the life she once knew. She told herself she had chosen this path for Luca, for the chance to build something that mattered. Still, she wondered if she had walked into a cage more gilded and dangerous than the diner had ever been. The following day, Victoria passed her in the corridor, offering a smile that was sharp enough to cut. "Welcome to the tower," she murmured. "Let us see how long you last." Maya held her head high and kept walking, though her stomach twisted. She had survived cruel customers, mounting bills and sleepless nights. She could survive this too. But as the glass walls reflected her image to her, she realized survival alone would not be enough. She would have to learn to spread her wings, strong enough to beat back the circling hawks above her if she wanted to stay. Maya sat at her desk, surrounded by sketches and printouts, the walls of her office covered with bursts of color and lines of text. For the first time in years, she had rediscovered the rhythm of design, the quiet exhilaration of giving shape to an idea. She had poured herself into creating the identity of the Vale Foundation, but it was more than logos or branding. She was building a program called The Bridge, a system meant to catch people in the terrifying gap between stability and disaster. She remembered nights when one overdue bill threatened to unravel everything. She remembered staring at Luca's medication, knowing that buying it might mean losing the apartment. The Bridge would exist for families like hers, a rapid relief program offering 30 to 60 days of help, a pause button to keep the worst from happening. No endless paperwork, no humiliating interviews, just swift aid and a chance to breathe. Her presentation day arrived too quickly. The boardroom stretched wide and cold, all dark wood and gleaming chrome, a wall of glass opening to the skyline beyond. 6 board members sat in suits that looked sharper than knives, Victoria Crane among them, with her expression as composed as stone. At the head of the table, Adrian Vale sat silent, his green eyes unreadable, his hands folded neatly. Maya stood at the front, her palms damp, her voice trembling at first as she clicked through slides. She spoke of families on the brink, eviction notices pinned to doors, and prescriptions denied at pharmacy counters. She did not use her own story, but every word was pulled from it. The board listened silently, their faces neutral, their pens scratching notes. Her voice grew stronger, so she dared to believe they were hearing her. When she finished, the silence lingered. Then a man named Davies cleared his throat. "A very passionate presentation, Ms. Rivera." His tone was cool, deliberately non-committal. Imprisoned leaned forward, lifting the proposal packet between manicured fingers. "Passionate indeed," she said smoothly. "However, I see some alarming oversights." She tapped a page with her nail. "Minimal paperwork, emphasis on speed. That sounds less like a responsible program and more like a breeding ground for fraud. How do we ensure we are not handing out money to con artists spinning sob stories?" Maya had anticipated the challenge. "The goal is to remove barriers for the truly desperate," she said, her voice steadier now. "A small team of caseworkers would conduct rapid follow-ups. The initial grants are small enough to minimize risk, but large enough to change lives. It is about trusting people first." Victoria's laugh was soft but cutting. Trust is a lovely sentiment. In business, it is a disastrous model. We are not a soup kitchen, Ms. Rivera. Every dollar must be accountable. Your proposal lacks measurable outcomes, key performance indicators, and a scalable framework for fraud prevention. What you offer is emotion, not data. Stones. Maya felt her confidence falter as murmurs of agreement passed among the board members. Her carefully built vision suddenly sounded naive under the weight of corporate language. She searched for words, but their jargon was like a wall she could not climb. Her voice cracked as she tried to respond, and silence settled again, heavier than before. She looked to Adrian, desperate for some sign of support, but he remained silent, his expression calm, detached, almost as though he were watching a test unfold. The realization made her stomach sink. This was not only about her plan, it was about whether she could survive in this world at all. The chairman finally spoke. "We will table this for further review," a phrase that sounded polite but meant death. Paper shuffled, chairs pushed back, and the meeting became polite chatter. Victoria smiled faintly as she slipped the proposal back into her folder. Maya walked back to her office with her face burning. Noah followed with quick steps, trying to reassure her with awkward words, but she barely heard him. The boardroom had reduced her to an imposter, a child pretending at adulthood. She closed her office door and stood silently, staring at the sketches taped to her walls. The colors seemed to mock her. She thought of Luca, the nights she had promised him she would find a way to improve things. She thought of the receipt in her pocket, of the words that had lifted her from the diner. Character is currency. But in the tower above the city, surrounded by hawks who demanded spreadsheets and metrics, character felt like nothing at all. She sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands, wondering if she had made the greatest life mistake. 2 days after the failed presentation, Maya sat, hunched at her desk, her eyes fixed on the city skyline beyond the glass. The sketches of logos and designs that once filled her walls had become ghosts of a hope she no longer believed in. Every line looked amateur, every color naive. She felt like an intruder in the tower, tolerated only until her inevitable collapse. A knock at the door pulled her from her haze. Noah entered, his hands clutching a folded packet of paper, his expression uneasy. "Miss Rivera," he said quietly, "I thought you should see this." He placed the packet on her desk and stepped back as if afraid of what it contained. Abolish unfolded the pages with trembling fingers. Her eyes moved quickly across the lines, the words cutting deeper with each sentence. It was a proposal, not hers. This one bore the title, "The Gilded Evening of Giving." It was a plan for a lavish gala, a glittering event designed to draw the wealthiest donors of the city. The details were meticulous. Crystal chandeliers, a symphony orchestra, champagne towers. But what made her blood run cold was the section marked "Adopt a Family." Donors would be matched with carefully selected families, and their private tragedies would be packaged into glossy brochures like commodities for purchase. And at the bottom, under Project Lead, was her name in clean black ink. Closed. She reread it, then again, as if repetition would change it. But the words remained. Victoria Crane had taken her vision of compassion and twisted it into a spectacle. Maya's bridge program had been gutted and dressed sequentially, turned into a performance where pity would be bought and sold. And she had been made the face of it. Tears blurred her vision. If she refused, she would be branded uncooperative, incapable of following through. If she accepted, she would betray everything she believed in and promised Luca and herself. It was a checkmate delivered with a smile. She pressed her hands to her face, her chest heaving. For a moment, she could not breathe. The walls of her office closed in, the glass panels reflecting her shame at her. Noah's voice broke the silence, quiet but urgent. "I do not think this came from Mr. Vale. This has Crane's fingerprints all over it." Maya looked at him through tear-streaked cheeks. "It does not matter. It has my name on it." She rose abruptly, her fist. The corridors blurred as she walked, the click of her shoes echoing against polished floors. She passed sleek offices, men and women with confident strides and sharp eyes, none looking her way. She stepped into the elevator, her reflection staring back at her from its mirrored walls. She barely recognized herself. The strong lines of her face had been replaced by exhaustion and despair. When the doors opened onto the ground floor, she did not hesitate. She walked out into the city, her steps quick, her chest tight. She could not go home to Luca yet. His hopeful eyes would be unbearable. Instead, she wandered, the streets swallowing her in their noise. Towering buildings loomed above, their glass faces reflecting her failure in 1,000 shards. Sparkling through familiar streets until she returned to her old neighborhood. The rumble of the elevated train overhead, the smell of hot dogs from a vendor, and the chatter of neighbors on stoops all pressed in on her like a bittersweet embrace. Here, life had been hard, but it had been honest. Cruelty had been open, not hidden behind polite smiles and polished proposals. Her legs carried her to a small park where children squealed on a rusty swing set, their laughter piercing her heavy thoughts. She sat on a worn bench and let the tears come freely. For the first time since leaving the diner, she wondered if Adrian Vale had ever truly saved her. Perhaps he had only given her a different cage, one more beautiful but infinitely more treacherous. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, once, twice, 3 times. On the 5th call, she pulled it out with shaking hands. Adrian's name lit the screen. She answered, her voice flat and stripped of emotion. "What? Where are you?" his voice asked, calm and direct. "Does it matter?" she said bitterly. "I am quitting. Tell Crane she won. I am not cut out for your world." There was a pause, then his voice again. "Stay where you are. I am coming." Maya dropped the phone into her lap and stared at the children swinging in the fading light. She thought of running, of disappearing into the anonymity of the city, but her body was too heavy, her spirit too broken. She remained on the bench, her face pale and streaked with tears, waiting for whatever would come next. The black sedan appeared at the edge of the park 20 minutes later, its polished surface reflecting the fading light. Maya sat rigid on the bench, arms wrapped tightly around herself, determined not to look hopeful or believe anything good could come of this. Adrian Vale stepped out of the car dressed simply in dark jeans and a pullover, more like the man she had first seen in the diner than the billionaire who commanded the glass tower. He crossed the grass without hesitation and sat at the other end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long time, he said nothing. They watched the children swing higher and higher, their laughter carrying into the dusk. The silence was oddly comforting, more honest than words could have been. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet. "I know about the memo. I understand what Crane did in the boardroom. I let it happen." Maya flinched as if struck. Her throat burned.
"So it was just a game to you,"
she whispered.
"See if the charity case could swim with the sharks."
"No." His tone sharpened, then softened again. "It was a test, but not only for you, but also for them. For the system I built. I needed to see if they could recognize genuine value over polished performance. They failed, and I needed you to see what kind of battlefield this truly is."
"I cannot fight,"
she said, her voice breaking.
"I do not belong in that boardroom. I do not speak their language."
"You do not have to," Adrian answered firmly. "You have to speak your own." He turned to her, the mask of corporate polish gone from his face. "But you are right. I was not honest with you. I asked too much without telling you the whole truth." Yav jacket and drew out a worn leather wallet. He removed a laminated clipping from it, which was folded and yellowed with age. He handed it to her with reverence. Maya unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the headline, "Off-duty paramedic, a hero in highway pileup." Her heart stumbled. She read the article, her vision blurring. The name leapt out like fire. Daniel Rivera, her father. Maya described a multi-car crash on the I-95 16 years ago. Her father had pulled a woman from a burning car seconds before it was engulfed in flames. He had saved her life. Weeks later, he had died suddenly of a heart attack, his heroism fading into obscurity. Adrian, the woman he saved, said softly, his voice thick with memory, That was my mother. Maya's breath stopped. She stared at him, her mind whirling. "My saved her life," Adrian continued. "My father was in the car behind hers. He saw everything. He called your father fearless. But after the ambulance left, your father disappeared into the crowd."
My parents tried to find him to thank him. He was gone when they tracked his name through the paramedic service. They never got to repay the debt.
He looked away toward the skyline, his jaw tight. 2 years later, both my parents died in another crash. I was thrown into the foster system. But I never forgot his name, Daniel Rivera. For years I searched for his family. It was not easy. Your mother moved, she remarried, records disappeared. But eventually I found you, the daughter of the man who saved my mother's life. Maya clutched the clipping in trembling hands, tears streaking down her face. All this time she had thought Adrian's help was charity, an inexplicable gift. But it was something else, not pity, not a coincidence, a debt carried across years. "I came to the diner to see you for myself," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I decided to pay off your debts and leave quietly. But then I saw you. I saw him in you. That same strength, that same quiet dignity." It was never charity, Maya. It was a debt of honor. The world tilted beneath her. The humiliation, the fear, the endless weight of debt, all of it, reframed in a moment. Her father's sacrifice had not vanished into nothing. It had reached across time to save her and Luca. Her tears were not of shame now, but of profound understanding. Adrian's voice dropped lower. "You are not here because of luck. You are here because of legacy. You carry your father's strength, and if you let it, it will take you further than you think." Maya pressed the clipping against her chest, her sobs breaking through. She felt anchored for the first time since stepping into the tower, not by Adrian's wealth, but by her father's memory. This was no cage. This was a chance to continue a story begun years before, forged in fire and sealed in blood. She turned to Adrian, her eyes blazing through the tears. "I will not let him down." And in that moment, she knew the fight was no longer about proving herself to the hawks of Vale Tower. It was about honoring the man who had given her life twice, once with his love, and once with his courage on a burning highway. The morning after Adrian revealed the truth, Maya returned to Vale Tower with a different fire in her chest. The elevator ride that had once filled her with dread now felt like an ascent into a battlefield she was determined to claim. She no longer carried herself as a trespasser. She walked through the glass corridors with her head high, her father's legacy burning in her heart. She bypassed her office entirely and entered a high-level planning meeting uninvited. Around the long table sat executives with gleaming pens and colder eyes. At the head, Victoria Crane presided with her usual composure, a faint smirk curving her lips when she saw Maya. "I believe you are in the wrong room," she said. "No," Maya answered, her voice strong and unwavering. "I am exactly where I need to be." The words sliced through the murmurs in the room. She set a stack of sketches and notes on the table. "The gilded evening is canceled," she declared. "It is exploitative. We will not turn suffering into a spectacle for the rich." Gasps circled the room. Victoria's eyes narrowed to slits. "On whose authority do you presume to—" "Caucasian," cut in, her voice ringing with unexpected power. "And on Mr. Vale's." She turned toward Adrian, seated at the end of the table. He did not speak, but his gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. The silence was permission. Maya unfolded her vision. She called it the Bridge Builders Initiative. Instead of a gala dripping with excess, the event would be held in a raw industrial space transformed into a living gallery. Each installation would represent a fundamental problem: a veteran in need of a prosthetic limb, a single mother lacking childcare, a student without access to technology. Guests would not donate unthinkingly into a faceless fund. They would use digital tablets to fulfill a specific need, directly. Each time they funded one, a screen would light up announcing "a family saved" or "a future secured." Her voice filled the room with conviction. "We will not sell pity. We will build connections. The wealthy will see precisely where their money goes. They will become part of the solution, not spectators. Victoria scoffed. Grim, uncomfortable, utterly doomed. You cannot ask millionaires to feel guilty. Fundraising is aspiration, not confrontation. Maya met her glare without flinching. This is not about aspiration, it is about impact. The board erupted in whispers, their polished masks cracking with uncertainty. Adrian raised a hand and silence fell. "Let her work," he said. Like a gavel. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Maya gathered her papers, her pulse thundering. For the first time, she felt the ground beneath her feet was hers. The weeks leading up to the event were chaotic. Maya worked night and day, sketching blueprints for exhibits, meeting with community leaders, refining every detail. Noah became her shadow, running errands, coordinating schedules, and protecting her from Victoria's quiet sabotage. Adrian checked in sparingly, his presence a steady reminder of trust rather than interference. The night of the event arrived. The space was raw brick and steel beams, stripped of glamour. Yet under Maya's vision, it had become a cathedral of purpose. Screens glowed softly. Installations told stories with stark honesty. The wealthy donors arrived in tailored suits and glittering gowns, their expressions skeptical as they entered the unfamiliar atmosphere. The room buzzed with confusion for a tense moment. Glasses clinked, conversations murmured, but no one engaged. Maya's stomach clenched. Victoria lingered at the crowd's edge, her smile sharp with anticipation of failure. Then, an older woman, draped in diamonds, stopped before the veteran's prosthetic limb was installed. She read his story, her lips trembling. Slowly, she tapped her tablet. A screen lit up. A hero's mobility funded. Gasps rippled through the room. A tech mogul moved to another installation and funded a specialized formula for an infant. Another screen lit, then another. The air shifted. Hesitation turned into momentum. The donors competed not in extravagance, but in impact. Each lit screen became a spark, and soon the entire room glowed with proof of change. By the night's end, the foundation had tripled its fundraising goal. More important than numbers, the air throbbed with connection, a sense that for once, wealth had been used as a bridge rather than a wall. Victoria left the event without a word, and her resignation was delivered to Adrian's desk the next morning. Maya stood at her office window as dawn painted the city gold. Adrian joined her, his voice soft with respect. "You did not just host an event, Maya. You showed them how to build bridges." She thought of her father and whispered, "I only followed what he taught me." Her journey had shifted again, from a waitress barely surviving to a leader shaping change. And for the first time, the tower no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a foundation strong enough to carry the weight of a legacy. 2 years later, Maya Rivera stood in her office on the 48th floor of Vale Tower, sunlight pouring through the glass walls and warming the polished wood beneath her feet. The foundation had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The Bridge Builders Initiative had become a model studied nationwide, replicated by organizations that once dismissed her as naive. She had spoken at conferences, advised governments, and sat in rooms where decisions shaped lives far beyond hers. Yet even as her voice carried weight, she never forgot where it began, in the quiet resilience of a diner waitress who refused to break. Her brother Luca was no longer fragile and pale but vibrant, his laughter echoing through their shared apartment. His treatments had done more than buy time, they'd given him life. Now in his first year of pre-med, he studied with the same intensity Maya once gave to her sketchbooks, determined to one day heal others as he had been healed. Once cluttered with overdue bills and fear, their small living room now held textbooks and coffee cups scattered across a table. Hope lived there, solid and real. Maya's role at the foundation had changed her as much as it had changed the world around her. She had grown into her authority, no longer the girl who trembled under Victoria Crane's cold smile. She was decisive now, her voice carrying conviction that silenced doubters. But she had also learned to temper fire with patience, to channel passion into structure. Each program launched under her leadership was compassionate and carefully measured, born of hard lessons in the boardroom where empathy alone was never enough. Clang Adrian remained at her side, though not always visibly. His presence was steady, a quiet partnership built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. He no longer treated her as an investment, but as an equal, someone who had proven herself, not because of his wealth, but because of her strength. Their conversations often drifted beyond the mechanics of the foundation into philosophy, legacy, and the strange threads of fate that had bound their families together. One rainy Tuesday evening, Maya drove through the city after a long day, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. She turned off the highway impulsively and found herself back at the Aurora Diner. Its neon sign buzzed faintly against the drizzle. Unchanged from the night everything had shifted, and inside the air smelled of fried onions and stale coffee, timeless in its stubbornness. She slid into a booth and ordered a cup of coffee. Across the room, a young waitress hurried between tables, her smile forced, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Maya watched her with a pang of recognition. She saw the practiced grace, the weariness hidden beneath politeness, the unspoken fear that this was all life would ever offer. It was like looking into a mirror of her past, a ghost of the girl she had been. When the bill arrived, it was only a few dollars. Maya slipped a $500 tip beneath the receipt, careful to make it enough to matter, but not so much that it felt like fantasy. She wrote a single line in steady handwriting. "I see how hard you are working. Your strength is worth more than you know. Do not let anyone make you feel small." She left without waiting to see the girl's reaction, knowing some doors are meant to be discovered in solitude. As she drove away, the diner lights fading behind her, Maya realized that Adrian had not saved her. He had only held open a door. It had been her courage to walk through it, her vision to build what lay on the other side. And now her purpose was to hold that door open for others, to ensure that countless people like the girl in the diner would find their way into the light. The city stretched before her, vast and alive, no longer a place of cages but of bridges. She felt her father's legacy in every heartbeat, a reminder that strength is not forged in comfort but fire. Daniel Rivera had saved a life on a burning highway, and through that act, had unknowingly carved a path for his daughter to save countless more. Maya's journey from waitress to leader was not about wealth or titles, but the power of being seen and choosing dignity when the world demanded despair. She carried that truth like a lantern, determined to pass its light forward. In the end, true worth was never measured in money or power, but in the quiet integrity shown when no one was watching, and in the courage to leave the door open for those still waiting in the shadows.